Good afternoon. Today was such a beautiful sunny day, I decided to do the devotional outdoors at a reservation just a couple minutes away from the church. If you've been keeping up with the Bible reading, recently you came across Psalm 23, and I thought this would be a good spot from which to read and meditate on this text. So let's do that together now. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This most famous of Psalms is just a masterpiece of poetry. It's both simple and yet it's profound. It uses a lot of imagery and metaphor, and yet it manages to be deeply comforting and hope-giving in some concrete ways. And if you're anything like me, when you hear a text like this, certain images come to mind. Maybe a place like this with lush green fields. That's part of why I chose this spot. However, I have a confession to make. I've been intentionally misleading you, because images that come to our mind when we read Psalm 23 of a place like this with rolling grassy hills, lush grasslands, they actually don't exist in Israel, as it turns out. In Israel, most of the shepherding occurs in places which look to us like wilderness. Even in the rainy season, from about November to March, the green pastures of Israel probably look more like a rocky wasteland to someone from New England. The grasses grow, but they grow short, only in the shadow of rocks. And even in the rainy season, there is grass, but there's not much grass in any one place, often only enough for the sheep to graze for that day. What's even more remarkable is the deeper you dig into this psalm, you realize there's several references to a very different scene than the one we're prone to picture. There's references to the Israelites' wilderness wanderings after they crossed the Red Sea. The I shall not want, it's the same verb used in Deuteronomy 2:7 when it says of the Israelites' time in the wilderness, "These 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing." In Exodus 15, we read, "You have led in your steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode." That word abode is interesting. It's actually referring to a place of temporary rest and shelter that often shepherds would take their flocks to. And it's actually the same word here in Psalm 23 in verse 2 when it talks of pastures. And the verb guide, you guide us, is the same in both texts. There's a couple other connections as well. So what's the point of all this? Well, the image in Psalm 23 is of a wise and loving shepherd who guides his flock to the places he knows there is enough food for them for the day, where there are still pockets of cool, still water, but they don't last forever. So the shepherd has to know where they still are. That's the image that would have come to the Israelites' minds, both because of their experience shepherding sheep with limited grass on rocky terrain, and because of the echoes of the Exodus, where God provided for them enough food for that day. So their trust was always going to be in their caring shepherd, and having enough for the day was a byproduct of their shepherd's care for them. Do we trust him that much, even today? Do we trust him for the things we know we need, things we can't live without? Can we say, along with the psalmist in Psalm 34, that because God is always faithful to his promises, that we can confidently say we will lack no good thing? And if not, is there a connection between the lack of peace and restoration in our souls and our unwillingness to let our good shepherd guide us, to trust him, to let him lead us, to recognize his voice even as he recognizes ours, and to follow it, to know that he is safe and good, and that his paths always bring us life? If that's a struggle for you, as it sometimes is for me, I would encourage you to do something that David is actually doing in this psalm, though we may miss it. He's looking back at God's faithfulness, and he's looking forward to an ultimate hope. We see the looking back in the echoes of God's faithfulness in the Exodus, and we won't parse this all out, but there seems to be in verses 5 and 6 that you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and following. This is banquet language. Yes, it's an acknowledgement of God's present provision, but I believe it's also looking forward to a time where there will be a great wedding feast, where there will no longer be just enough provision for that day. And so when anxiety hits and maybe trust isn't your first response, the model of the psalm is to look back and to recount God's faithfulness, all the times he's provided for us when we didn't have enough to make it, and to look forward to a great feast where we will dine with him face to face, and to let those reflections on his goodness and faithfulness direct our eyes and our ears to him today. And if you look out and the landscape before you looks less like green pastures and more like a rocky wilderness, look to the God who provides grass and water that his sheep may not know about. His name is the Lord, and he is faithful. You can trust him. So as you look around this spring and you see the green exploding all around us, let that remind you of the green pastures in Psalm 23. And though they don't always look like we sometimes picture them, remember that our shepherd has promised to be with us and to provide for our every need. And as our dependence and trust in him grows, so does our understanding of his good news. Blessings. We'll see you Sunday.